Exposing the perfect son, the shocking lies behind family secrets. I always thought family dynamics were just messy. Little things you let slide because, well, that's just how families are, right? You don't think much of it at first, but then it starts to weigh on you. Slowly, you start to feel like you're a bit of a ghost in your own life, quietly observing as the narrative shifts around you and you wonder, when did I become the villain? It all started when my brother, Ryan, decided he was going to be the hero. It wasn't something he announced, of course. He didn't need to. He had this way of making it clear without saying a word. It was in the way he casually mentioned how much he was sacrificing to take care of Dad, how much he was handling everything, like I wasn't even part of the picture. I let it go at first, thinking maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe I was just busy with my life, work, my own family, everything else. But then came the dinner, the one where we were supposed to all gather around like everything was fine. And that's when Ryan dropped his bombshell. Taking care of Dad, paying the bills, making sure everything's in order, it's a lot of work, he said, like it was just another regular conversation. He looked at me while he said it, but I could feel it. He wasn't just talking about Dad's care. He was talking about me. Like I was the one who wasn't doing enough, the one who couldn't be bothered. I wanted to speak up, to tell him that I was calling every day, that I was there for Dad even if I wasn't physically there all the time. But I just couldn't. Something about the way he said it, the way everyone nodded in agreement, made me feel like I was already the one on trial. He was the good son who stayed close, who took charge, while I was the one who had to defend myself for being distant. Ryan loved this. He loved being the hero, the one everyone depended on. Growing up, it was always the same. He was the reliable one, the one who picked up the slack when things got tough. He never let anyone forget it. But I didn't mind. I had my own life, my own path, and I didn't need to compete with him for attention. But now it felt different. Now it felt like he was painting me into a corner and I wasn't sure how to fight back. As he went on and on about how much he was doing, about how much he was sacrificing for Dad, I felt the weight of my own guilt pressing down on me. Was I doing enough? Was I not there for Dad? The doubts started creeping in, and before I knew it, they had taken root. I didn't know what to think anymore. Was Ryan really the hero, or was he just playing the part? The more Ryan talked, the more I felt this knot tighten in my chest. Every time we sat around the dinner table, he'd casually mention how much he was handling for Dad, like he was carrying this massive burden all on his own. He'd go on about the medical appointments, the endless phone calls, the bills that were piling up. He had it all under control, he said. I was supposed to be impressed. Maybe even guilty. And I was. At first. But then, the more I listened, the more something didn't sit right with me. The cracks started to show little by little. There was something in the way Ryan glossed over the practical details. He never once talked about the finances or the mounting bills. Every time I brought it up, he'd quickly change the subject or brush it off with a "don't worry about it, I've got it all handled." But when I asked for specifics, silence. He'd nod vaguely like he was being responsible, but the details never quite added up. And here's the thing, he never seemed too busy to live his own life. I mean, he always had time for his golf games, his weekend trips. Every time I asked about his schedule, it was always the same, "Oh, I'm just so swamped with Dad's care. I barely have time to breathe." Yet, he was out on the golf course every Saturday, posting photos of his weekend escapades. I could see them, clear as day, pictures of him, grinning ear to ear, as if his life was one big vacation. It wasn't that he didn't deserve a break, but how could he manage all this supposed stress over Dad and still have time for that? It didn't make sense. It wasn't just the bills. It was everything. It was how he kept making himself the hero, the one who was there, always, for Dad, and how it felt like everyone else, especially me, was expected to just fall in line. I started to wonder if this whole perfect son routine was just that, a routine. A performance. He wasn't just taking care of Dad, he was making sure everyone saw him doing it. I could feel the tension building inside me, but I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't want to seem like I was attacking him, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't just sit back and let him rewrite the story. I had to do something. Before I share what happened next, the moment that finally made me confront Ryan, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button because this story is just getting started. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The more I thought about it, the more Ryan's words didn't add up. So I decided to dig deeper. I wasn't trying to play detective, but something inside me told me I had to know the truth. I started looking at Ryan's social media. It wasn't about being nosy, it was about finding any clue that might explain this growing unease. And then I found it. I'd been scrolling through his Facebook when I saw a post that caught my eye. It was from last weekend, while Dad had been in the hospital for a procedure. Ryan was smiling, surrounded by his buddies, holding a golf club like it was the greatest moment of his life. The caption read, "Another perfect day on the course. Couldn't ask for more." I felt a pit in my stomach. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was. Proof that Ryan had been out enjoying himself, completely carefree, while Dad was lying in a hospital bed. I kept scrolling, almost in disbelief, and that's when I saw it again. Another weekend, another post. This time it was a group picture. Ryan and his friends, grinning like they didn't have a care in the world. "Weekend getaway with the best crew," the caption said. It was all so casual, so normal. But my dad wasn't normal. He wasn't fine. He was sick. And yet, Ryan was spending every weekend like it was just another day off. Wasn't he supposed to be taking care of Dad? Wasn't that what he'd been telling me and everyone else for months? The posts kept coming one after another. Each weekend, a new picture, a new post. Ryan wasn't just playing golf once in a while. He was doing it regularly, without a single mention of his supposed responsibilities at home. It was like he was living two completely different lives. The more I uncovered, the more my stomach turned. How could he have lied to all of us? How could he have looked me in the eye and told me that he was the one handling everything, while I was the one abandoning Dad? I had seen the posts, the photos, the smiles. How could he have kept up this charade for so long? I felt betrayed. I felt foolish for ever believing him, for ever letting him paint me as the one who couldn't be bothered. But as much as the anger and hurt burned inside me, there was one thing I couldn't ignore. I wasn't ready to confront him yet. I wasn't sure if I was just misinterpreting things or if my brother had really been lying all along. I needed more. I needed concrete proof that I wasn't just overreacting. But I also knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just let this go. The truth was out there and I was going to find it, no matter what. I could feel the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, but I needed one last confirmation. It came when I checked my email that morning. An email from the hospital, the one I'd been avoiding for weeks. The subject line read, "Outstanding balance for Josephson." My stomach dropped. I opened it, and there it was, more than $6,000 in unpaid bills. The note said payments were expected to have been made last month, but nothing had been received. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring in front of me. Ryan had told me repeatedly that he was handling everything, that he was the one paying the bills, managing Dad's care, taking on the responsibility. But now, here was the proof. He hadn't paid a single dime. I felt sick, betrayed. How could he lie like that? How could he make me feel guilty for not being there when he was the one who wasn't doing anything at all? He'd spent all this time painting himself as the savior, the good son, and here I was, left holding the truth. I picked up the phone, dialing the hospital. My hands were shaking, but I had to do this. I needed answers. When the receptionist picked up, I introduced myself and asked about the balance. Her response was cold, factual. She confirmed that the bills had been sent to Ryan's address, and that nothing had been paid. The confirmation hit me like a slap in the face. Ryan had lied. Not only had he failed to pay the bills, but he'd also made me feel like I was the one who had neglected everything. The rage bubbled inside me, but I kept it together. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. Not anymore. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. That was it. The final straw. I had the evidence. I had the proof. There was no denying it now. Ryan couldn't spin this. I wasn't going to sit back and let him keep playing the hero while everyone else was left in the dark. It was time to confront him. But not quietly, not privately. I was going to do it publicly. I was going to make sure everyone saw him for what he really was, the manipulator, the liar. For months, he'd painted me as the one who couldn't be bothered, the one who wasn't doing enough. Well, the truth was about to come out. And this time, I was going to be the one to set the record straight. I knew this wouldn't be easy. I knew he'd try to twist things, turn it all around on me. He was good at that, he always had been. But I was done. I wasn't going to let him spin this anymore. I was going to expose him. I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. For Dad. For me. and for the sake of everyone who had been manipulated by Ryan's perfect son act. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. I was going to do it at the family dinner. I wasn't going to let him hide anymore. The night of the family dinner felt like walking into the lion's den. I had everything I needed: medical bills, screenshots of Ryan's golf outings, all the proof that had been swirling in my mind for weeks. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't prepared for how heavy it would feel, how much the tension would coil in my chest the closer I got to exposing the truth. When I walked into the house, everything seemed normal. My mom was setting the table, humming as if nothing had changed. Dad was sitting at the end of the table, thinner than I remembered, but still trying to hold it all together. Ryan wasn't there yet, which only added to the tension building in the air. I sat down quietly, trying to steady myself. I knew I had to do this. I had to make them all see Ryan for who he really was. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see through his act any longer. Then, as if on cue, Ryan walked in. His usual confident smile was plastered on his face, and I could already see the glimmer in his eyes, the one that told him he had everything under control. He barely even looked at me, probably too busy playing the role of the dutiful son to notice I was ready to tear that image apart. I waited for him to sit down, and then I made my move. "Ryan," I said, my voice calm but carrying enough weight to get his attention. "I've been going over Dad's medical records." I paused for a beat, watching his face, knowing he already knew what was coming. "It seems there's an outstanding balance on his account. Over $6,000. I could see the shift in his expression. His eyes flickered just for a moment. He opened his mouth, probably ready to deny it, but I wasn't done. "Not yet. I thought you said you were handling everything," I continued, pulling the stack of papers in front of me and placing them on the table one by one. I let the silence hang in the air as the reality of my words sunk in. I wasn't just accusing him, I was showing him and everyone else the truth. "You told me you were paying the bills. You made it sound like you were covering all of this." I could feel the tension in the room growing thick as I pushed forward. My parents were still silent, eyes flickering between me and Ryan. My dad shifted in his seat, but Ryan still refused to acknowledge the magnitude of what I was saying. Instead, he cleared his throat, trying to cover his tracks. "I've been handling it," Ryan said, his voice shaky now, trying to hold onto the image he had so carefully crafted. I didn't want you to worry." "Oh, I'm not worried, Ryan," I said, my voice firm now. "But the hospital's billing department seems to be pretty worried. They told me you're the one who's supposed to be handling these bills, but not a single payment has been made. How do you explain that?" For the first time, Ryan faltered. His jaw tightened, his eyes darting to my mom, silently pleading with her to intervene. But she didn't. She was too stunned, too confused to understand what was happening. My mom's face was pale, her lips trembling as she looked back and forth between us. Dad didn't say a word. He just stared at the table, his hands shaking slightly. I wasn't done yet. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I swiped through the photos and showed them to everyone. Ryan, smiling with his golf buddies, enjoying weekend after weekend on the course while Dad was in the hospital. Each photo was a slap in the face, each one a reminder of how he'd lied, how he'd painted himself as the hero while abandoning his own father. "Funny," I said, letting the words hang in the air, "because every weekend for the last month I've seen you here. On the golf course. No sign of you taking care of Dad, but plenty of signs that you were living your best life." The room went dead silent. I could hear my breath in my ears, my heart pounding in my chest. I watched Ryan's face turn from panic to red-hot embarrassment. His eyes darted to my mom again, but she wasn't looking at him the same way anymore. She was starting to see the cracks. Ryan opened his mouth, trying to salvage the situation, but the words wouldn't come. He looked like a deer in headlights, his perfect son facade crumbling before everyone's eyes. "Don't try to deny it," I said, my voice rising now sharper. "I have everything here. The bills, the photos, the lies. You've been lying to us all. You've been lying to him." I gestured toward Dad, who still hadn't spoken, but the pain in his eyes was clear. Ryan's face was pale now, and for the first time, he looked defeated. He had no excuses, no explanations that could fix this. He had spent so long convincing everyone he was the one who was doing it all, the one who was holding the family together, and now all that was left was the cold truth. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something else, a kind of relief maybe. A weight had lifted off my shoulders, but it didn't feel like a win. It felt like everything was different now, like there was no going back. The family dynamic had shifted. Ryan was no longer the golden child. He was exposed for the liar he'd been all along. I looked at my parents, my mom, still stunned, trying to process what had just happened, and my dad, who was now looking at Ryan not with admiration but with a quiet disappointment. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like the bad daughter. I didn't feel guilty anymore. The truth was out. And Ryan? His perfect son image had shattered right there, in front of everyone. The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air, pressing down on each of us. Ryan was still sitting there, his face pale, his hands trembling. He tried to speak, to explain himself, but the words wouldn't come. His usual bravado had completely vanished. He couldn't hide behind the perfect son image anymore, and for the first time he looked truly human, flawed, vulnerable, and broken. My mom, still in shock, turned to him with eyes filled not with admiration but with confusion and hurt. "Ryan, is this really true?" Her voice cracked as she asked, but there was no more tenderness in it, no more pride. My dad, on the other hand, didn't even look at him. His gaze was fixed on the table, his face a mask of quiet disappointment. The golden child had fallen, and there was no saving him now. I didn't feel the joy of victory. I didn't feel the rush of triumph I had expected. What I felt was a deep, aching emptiness. It wasn't just about the lies, the betrayal, or the way Ryan had manipulated all of us. It was about the damage to our family, the irreparable fractures that could never be undone. The trust that had been shattered, the love that had been poisoned by deceit. Ryan tried to defend himself, but it was no use. The facade was gone. He was no longer the hero in the story. I could see him floundering, grasping for something to hold onto, but there was nothing left. It was over. I had exposed him for who he really was, but at what cost? What had we all lost in the process? I watched him, sitting there in the middle of the room, his world crumbling around him, and I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of sadness and relief. Relief that I was no longer the one carrying the guilt, no longer the one painted as the villain in our family's story. But sadness, too, because I knew that everything had changed. Nothing would ever be the same again. We could never go back to the way we were. I thought about all the times I had doubted myself, all the moments I had second-guessed my decisions. I had tried to be the good daughter, the one who called, who visited, who cared. But Ryan had made me feel small, like I wasn't doing enough, like I was the one who was selfish. And now I could see the truth. I could see that I had been right all along. But knowing that didn't erase the pain, didn't erase the years of resentment that had built up between us. My mom finally spoke again, her voice quieter now, tinged with regret. "I didn't know," she whispered, looking between me and Ryan. "I thought you were doing the right thing, Ryan. I thought you were taking care of everything." I wanted to say something to her, to reassure her, but the words felt hollow. She wasn't entirely to blame. Ryan had painted this perfect picture, made us all believe in his self-sacrifice. He had been so convincing, so persuasive in his lies, that it was hard to see the truth until it was too late. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted to small, awkward exchanges. No one knew what to say. The air felt thick with unspoken words, with the realization that our family would never be the same. Ryan stayed mostly silent, his face a mix of shame and frustration. My mom busied herself with the dishes, unable to meet anyone's eyes, and Dad simply stared ahead, lost in his thoughts. I didn't know what to do with myself. I couldn't shake the feeling that the family I had known was gone, swept away by Ryan's lies. But at the same time I felt something stirring inside me, a sense of clarity. I had done what I had to do. I had fought for the truth, and no matter how painful it was, I had to live with the consequences. As I looked around the room at the family I once knew, I realized that this wasn't just about me and Ryan. It was about the way we had all allowed this lie to grow. We had all played a part in it, in letting Ryan control the narrative. But now that story was over. The truth was out. And as hard as it was, I knew it was the only way forward. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't undo the damage. But I could move forward with my head held high, knowing that I had finally stood up for myself, for my dad, and for the truth. And as I walked away from that night, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had unfolded, I couldn't help but wonder, what would our family look like now? Would we ever be able to heal from this? Or had the damage been too deep, the betrayal too great? Only time would tell. But for now I had peace. A bittersweet peace, knowing that at least the truth had been set free.